Hello, everybody. Glad to be here again. Today with Lauren Tober. So it's such a pleasure, especially because we are in the opposite direction in the world. So it's glad that we can meet together. And yeah, just thank you for taking the time to be with us today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. What a joy.
And so before we dive into all the topics and questions and questionings, I wanted to ask you if you could maybe help us, everyone, to just ground and arrive, and maybe with a practice that you like and you want to share with us.
Sure, I'd love to.
Cool.
And I
Thank
probably
you.
need to do that as well. I've just finished a busy day
Mm.
work, seeing clients, so helped me to transition to the space here as well.
Mm.
So I invite everyone to join us, anyone who would like to find a position that feels comfortable for you.
Mm.
Your eyes can be open or closed, whatever works for you. And of course, if you're driving at the moment, please keep them open. As you're resting here, I invite you to sense whatever sensation your body, whatever surface your body is resting on. So whether that's the floor or a chair, whatever it is for you, sensing the surface that your body is on in this moment. And finding a moment of comfort, a place of comfort. So perhaps asking yourself if there's anything that you could do to make yourself 5 to 10% more comfortable. And making any necessary changes to your position to orient towards comfort. And if your feet are resting on the floor, but even if they're not, the invitation is to imagine that you have roots going down from the bottom of your feet down into the earth. And this is a practice that I love to share because I teach a lot online. And so I invite you to sense, to imagine, to visualize that you have roots in the bottom of your feet going down into the earth. And these roots are going deep into the earth. And it doesn't matter where we are in the world or whatever time you're listening to this. Can you imagine those roots going down and connecting us all? I'm here in Australia. You're in France, and I imagine your listeners are around the world. But the earth connects us all. So no matter where we are, and no matter what time we're listening or watching this, we can feel that connection to our Sangha, to our community, to each other. Let's take a moment here to breathe and to be present with that. Or not, whatever works for you. This is invitations only. And as you're resting here, sensing the surface that you're on, perhaps sensing the ground beneath your feet and the roots connecting into the earth, connecting us all. Taking a moment to sense the movement of the breath in the body, or perhaps the sound of the breath in the body, or perhaps nothing at all, being present with whatever is, knowing that these are simply invitations and you can take it or leave it. This moment to be present with ourselves, just as we are, without trying to fix or change anything. And be present with each other, this global Sangha of yoga practitioners and teachers. Everything just as it is. And yourself just as you are. And then bringing the attention back to the space that you're sitting in. If your eyes were closed, perhaps starting to open them, moving your body in any way your body is calling to be moved. And reorienting back to the conversation. Nice big stretch there.
Yeah. Thank you. I I just savor these moments at the beginning of the conversations. It's such a doorway into the practice of the guests that I have the pleasure to spend an hour with. It's like, what do they want to bring to the table? And even the voice and the pace, it's like meeting you through the practice. I really appreciate that.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love that. And I share these practices a lot, and nearly like every time I do it, I'm always just delighted and surprised at how nourishing it can be and how it can feel like we've arrived. But it's not until we do a practice like this that we're actually there. We've actually shown up for ourselves and for the people that we're with. It's these simple practices that can do these little, like, really quite dramatic sometimes, not always, but sometimes quite dramatic kind of state shifts to bring us, busy, whatever it is that we were doing into this moment. So thank you for the invitation to share that.
Yeah, it's such just like an entering, really, like being with what is and not like in the storm kind of like of daily life and the rhythm, and just like, okay, land, really. And what I really appreciated was like the intention to bridge from the individual to the collective, like through the roots, for example, or just and then the ground, because it's like our mutual ground. So everyone steps onto the same floor, kind of. So wherever we are, it's the same planet. So it's really connecting, and I appreciated that. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's very meaningful, actually, because that's something that really came up for me this year, I would say. I've been teaching maybe for 6 years or something, so not much, kind of. To me, it doesn't sound much, but I feel that I have so much to discover. And this year, to me, was really shifting from the individual to the collective, and how precious and yet forgotten it can sound and be in yoga settings and studios and even companies, and how sometimes yoga can be really utilized into productivity or more health or being younger and more fit and whatever. And I get that. And also how important it is to reunite to the collective, because that's kind of the essence of yoga. So I don't know if you've been through this process as well, or if it's always been there for you, this awareness that wholeness is part of us. I don't know how it sounds for you.
Yeah, I mean, there is so many parts of this, and I think this, like, from a very concrete level, this practice really came up for me during COVID, when everyone was Zooming, right? Like, we were all having these video calls. We're teaching yoga. The mental health, the warrior yoga training I was doing moved from a hybrid model to a 100% online model. So we were finding ways. For me, it was an exploration of how can we be connected? How can we feel this connection, the same kind of connection we feel when we sit in a yoga studio, or we sit down at the beach or under a tree and we sit in circle and we hold conversations or share practices in that way. How can we bring that experience, which is such a like a profound experience, into this kind of online Zoom space when people are in all parts of the world and are on all different time zones, and plus some people are live and some people are listening in later. And it amazes me that we can still do that. Like, I think now we've got that, because that'll happen like 3 years ago, right? That we were all kind of discovering that in a really kind of real life, everyday kind of way for the first time. So we've kind of got that now. But at that time, it was this real exploration about how can we have these meaningful connections in an online space. And for me, a practice like that was one of them, to connect to the earth, so connect to one of the elements, and to honor the land and to honor the earth. And if we have, if it was a longer practice, I would also be honoring, and maybe I can do that now, the traditional custodians of the land as well. So it's about the earth, and like the element of the earth, but also the traditional custodians, which where I am here in Mullumbimby on Bundjalung country in Australia. But then also to connect with each other as well in community, and both from a yoga perspective. So the worlds that I kind of live in are the yoga world and the mental health psychology type world. And for both of those worlds, like, community is such an important part of yoga, right? Sangha, coming together and having that support and coming together in community. And we know from a mental health perspective how important community and connection is. Like loneliness is, is an epidemic. It's an important part of mental health to have community around us. And when we feel lonely, then our mental health can take a hit.
Yeah, I love again how you bridge both of your worlds into one, and like the commonalities really, and even the co-regulation process itself, just as a therapist and a client, just because we are together, then it works kind of. So yeah, it's
the other part of that is, I also think in the yoga world and also in the psychology world, we can see everything as individualistic. And so if you're depressed or you're having some kind of issue, then it's your fault. It's something that you did wrong, or it's an individual trauma experience and your response to that, as opposed to understanding it as a society problem. Really, the way that we're not holding people and we're not supporting the earth, because we're talking about the earth, just then the earth, but also each other. So it's not just, if we're going through a challenging time, it's not just because we did something wrong or there's something wrong with us, that there is something, the society we live in, I don't think really supports positive mental health very well.
Yeah, definitely. It's reminding me of the thought. I think the quote was from Krishnamurti, I guess. It's kind of his style. Like, it's not a proof of mental health to be adapted to a sick society. And that just sticks to me. I'm just like, yeah, I totally understand that, and how oppression and inequality and just wide imbalance is present. And how can we as individual human beings navigate all of that? I'm not sure we can alone. So it's very precious to come back as well, and to, on the way, to just remove any shame or any guilt, or first be with it, and then also remind ourselves that it's not only us. So I appreciate the reminder, and especially through COVID, I guess it just came back even more for, people who are also into depression and just suffer from that before, for example, and COVID just mirrored the depression again, even stronger. So yeah, that's a challenging time. And even after, like many people talk about a global PTSD. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I think it's like a resilience approach that we need to grow onto the global PTSD that we have, if we have any, but really to utilize the tools of both yoga and Western psychology to heal at a global level, and how vast that project can sound.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the ripple effects of the trauma of COVID are still being felt.
Yeah, definitely.
By many people.
Totally. Yeah. And I was wondering if you see any other commonalities or differences maybe between the yoga and the therapy, let's say. So I don't know, yoga can have, therapy components, but is not represented as a therapy in itself. So yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on maybe the commonalities and the differences, if you see any.
That is a really big question. I'm not quite sure where to start. So let me see if I understand. So your question is, how does kind of yoga psychology and Western psychology intersect, or how can yoga help with mental health?
Yeah, kind of like, for example, where do you see yoga in Western psychology? Like, do you see any component of yoga that you can bring to the therapist office, for example, and vice versa? Or do you use really mental health awareness into your yoga classes, which is your theme, really? So I'm curious about where it overlaps and where it's really different.
Okay, big question. All right, so where so mindfulness is a big part of yoga, right? Being present in the moment and having this compassionate acceptance of things as they are. And when we look at Western psychology, mindfulness is becoming more and more part of that. When I first started as a psychologist, and I've been a psychologist for more than 20 years now, people weren't talking about mindfulness. It wasn't a thing. When I went back to uni, I was already a psychologist, then I went back to uni to complete my university in Australia, we call it uni. Went back to university and studied my doctorate. Then we started, that was probably 16, 17 years ago, they started to talk about mindfulness. So I think we had one class in a whole 3-year program. And now it's very different. But we're seeing more and more the mindfulness component and the awareness of the mind and being able to witness things rising and falling is now becoming much more part of mainstream Western psychology. So there's that mindfulness component, which arguably is one of the active components of CBT, for example, cognitive behavior therapy, which means that we need to be able to notice our thoughts. And we could argue that noticing a thought is witnessing, right? There needs to be a mindfulness of that. So the mindfulness part of it is more and more becoming part of mainstream Western psychology. And now we're also having more of an acceptance of somatic-based psychology as well. So bringing the body into the therapy room in different ways. So I think there's that overlap there. Since I think probably the 70s, there's been a real understanding of the power of relaxation in Western psychology, particularly for anxiety, for example, when we want to downregulate the nervous system. And there's a lot of practices in yoga to do with relaxation. Yoga Nidra is one example. So that's an overlap as well. We're also really starting to understand the role of the nervous system in mental health. And so there is a model called the window of tolerance model, which was coined by Dr. Dan Siegel. And so in the window of tolerance, this is a model that they often talk about in trauma. But I think it's applicable, much more widely than trauma as well. But the idea is that when we're in our window of tolerance, we can cope with life. It's called the optimum zone of arousal. So we might be a little bit dysregulated, there might be a little bit hyper or hypo aroused. Things can go up and down a little bit, but basically we can cope with life. However, if we go outside of our window of tolerance, we can get hyper aroused. In yoga, we call that rajasic. Otherwise, we might call it anxiety or excitement if we're really kind of have that kind of upregulation, excitement. And then if we go below the window of tolerance, that's called hypoarousal, or in yoga, we call that tamas as well. So we can, and that optimum zone of arousal, part of it, maybe the very, the middle part of the optimum zone of arousal, we could call sattva, right? And so there's these two different models. One comes from the psychology world, and the gunas come from yogic psychology, but there's a really nice overlap there. And actually, the yoga practices, a big part of the yoga practices are designed to downregulate and upregulate in order to cultivate sattva, to reduce rajas, reduce tamas in order to cultivate sattva. So there's this whole, yoga has this amazing abundance of practices to help us to regulate our nervous system, whether we have experienced trauma, whether we're feeling depressed, whether we're feeling anxious, whether we're, showing up for an interview like this and want to make sure we're regulated before we start talking, which is why practices like I did at the beginning and that you asked your guest to do at the beginning of each podcast, it's a practice for self-regulation, right? To bring us back within our window of tolerance, or our optimal zone of arousal.
Yeah.
I just
love
kind
how
of blur a whole different kind of
it's all over the place.
ways that they interact. But I hope that
that could be fun. But it's another podcast, like the wishy-washy podcast maybe, but definitely, how can we use and also bring yoga wherever you are and wherever we need it, and that's pretty useful. So I appreciate, and I really I'm kind of a big picture lover, kind of, and I love stepping back and seeing how almost every therapy modality talks about the same thing at the root, and how yoga was just there all along for thousands of years. So it makes sense, that it's all very common, and even if it's using different terminologies and with different maybe endings as well and goals, but still, the process can feel and be very, very similar, and that's pretty enriching to me, because many people can't afford either yoga or psychology, depending on the countries. In some countries it's even in France, for example, we can have psychology sessions for free because the medical institutions just pay for it, but yoga isn't represented as necessary, so it isn't paid. So if we can't attend to one of them or the other, we can find our way through healing. So that's encouraging as well. So I appreciate how the studies themselves are starting to, and the academics are starting to really see the utility and the benefits of those practices. So that's beautiful.
It's exciting. And you know, in terms of the differences, something that you said made me think about the differences between them. And I think one of the differences is the goal. Like the goal of Western psychology often is symptom reduction, right? I'm feeling depressed. I don't want to feel depressed anymore. I'm feeling anxious. I've had a traumatic experience. I don't want to be triggered by it anymore. And then we have the field of positive psychology, which is more about thriving and how can I thrive in the world. But yoga really isn't about either of those things, really, although we need to go, in many ways, we need to go through both of those to be able to, you know, have the goal of yoga, which is, you know, liberation or enlightenment. So yoga goes much further, has a much kind of more lofty
I had the image like of a container, you know, like yoga being the container, and then both of those modalities just being inside of it, but really like it's not the same goal and intention.
It's a different goal, and at the same time, I think it is important. So we don't want to just dismiss Western psychology because it doesn't have the same kind of lofty goal. Because often we need to work through the depression and the anxiety or the whatever it is. Working through that is an important part of liberation.
Yeah, totally.
And also liberation can be an important part of positive mental health states.
Yeah, totally. It's like the scale, you know, like it can be not the same scale, but still like the now goal, maybe not the ending goal, but now what you want to be with and transform can be the same. So using both techniques. So I appreciate that. And I'm curious because in France, I know in Australia, somatics and somatic psychology is kind of a thing and more maybe popular than before. So I'm glad for that. But in France, we just don't know it exists yet. So I'm a little bit like, you know, there is maybe one master degree in Paris, which is the capital, but like it's more of the symptoms and really seeing the symptoms and maybe learning about the emotions behind, but that's it. Like we don't really go deeper. And so I'm super curious because a part of me, I studied psychology, but like I didn't even finish my third year. So I just quitted uni and then become a yoga teacher. And I guess a part of me is like, oh, you didn't finish. So maybe that talks about me. But I know there is like a niche. There is something to do here, especially because we are, you know, as a culture, a René Descartes. So we have like the head on one side and the body on the other. And I know there is a deep need to see depression or, you know, any symptoms as a whole and as a symptoms and not as a pathology or as an individual problem. And this is what somatic psychology teaches us, but we don't have it here. So I'm always interested into coming back to uni and studying it and, you know, just adding that to the table. But I feel it's a little bit heavy on my shoulders, so I don't know yet if I will do that. But I was just curious about you. What did you study specifically in your master's or in your doctorate as well? And maybe it gives me some guidances or ideas.
Well, I did a Bachelor of Science and Asian Studies to start with, and with a double major in psychology. And then I went on and did an honors year, which I don't think you have in Europe, but in Australia it's another year after your bachelor in psychology. And then I had enough study, and what did I do after that? I did a 2-year internship. I think I did. Yeah. So I went and worked in community and mental health. So this is a model that we have in Australia. They're phasing it out now, but 20 years ago, whenever it was, this was the model that was there. So I spent 2 years working in community and mental health and rehabilitation. And then I went to India for a year and did practice yoga. I was like, I don't know if I want to be a psychologist. I'm going to go to India and I'll do my teacher training. And I went to London to do my teacher training, and then I went to India and spent about 9 months on and off in India studying. And then I decided that I did want to be a psychologist. So I came back to Australia, and that's when I did my doctoral program in clinical psychology. And there was no somatic psychology as part of the clinical psychology degree. I went to quite a conservative university, and like I said, we did one kind of mindfulness lecture and that was it. But I did write my doctoral thesis. Well, I came back from India to write my doctoral thesis on yoga, and the university excited about that idea. My supervisor was the professor, the kind of head professor of psychology at the university, and I just remember so clearly this day going into this office, and it's kind of an older guy, close to retirement, and he kind of looked at me and he's like, "And how do you spell yoga?" And I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is not going to work." So in the end, I wrote my doctoral thesis on mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for recurrent depression and anxiety, which is actually a kind of yoga. They just don't call it that, but it looks at bringing an integration of mindfulness, and including that is some very gentle mindful movement, integrating it with cognitive behavioral therapy, which is considered like the gold standard best practice treatment, like a manualized kind of program for depression and anxiety. And so that was kind of my formal training. And then I've just followed breadcrumbs over the years and studied in different ways. And, you know, I think in Australia, I think you can, a friend of mine has done like a master's in somatic psychology. Like you can do that. I haven't done that, but I have done, you know, different trainings and my own explorations and reading.
Yeah, I love the journey and as well like the stepping back and like, no, I'm not sure I want to do that. Oh, well, yeah, finally, yes. And I'm curious, what did trigger the intention to really become a psychologist in the end? What during this year away, why did you really wanted to go back to psychology? If there is like a pivotal moment? Yeah.
No, there was no pivotal moment. There was just a feeling, and really I really tune into that. What feels like the next step. And I think, you know, some people are born, I say that a bit flippantly, but some people have these big ideas about their lives and what they want to do. I want to go and, you know, I want to be a doctor, I want to save the world, or I want to, whatever it is. But most people, and I put myself in this category, we don't know what we want to do when we grow up, and we don't have a big plan. But what we can do is that we can follow the breadcrumbs. We follow the next thing that feels like it's lighting us up, or that falls in the right place at the right time. Or when we think about it, we just get this big smile on our face, and it just feels right. And that's the way that I do my life. I follow the breadcrumbs, and I follow the trail of things that either appear just at the right time or feel right in that moment. And so that's what felt right for me. When I was in India doing I spent 9 months doing different yoga teacher trainings in India, and just felt, you know, I want to do this psychology thing, but if I'm going to do it, I want to do it well. And I didn't feel like I had enough information to do it well, having done an internship. So, and also the internship because I lived in London as well, it wasn't recognized internationally. And the doctoral program was. So I went back, and I had my interview for the doctoral program in a field outside my yoga teacher's school in India, and everyone was outside doing kind of neti pots and like blowing their snot out all over the ground in front of and I was standing on a field with my flip phone, like this is how long ago it was, having an interview to get into the doctoral program, and trying not to laugh at everyone doing their neti pots during my my interview. But somehow it worked, and I got offered a place, which is amazing. So I came back to Australia.
I love this vision, and it just to me represents very well your double world, like just going together and like as a career, but I can imagine as well as just a self, a human. So I appreciate that, you know, like there is outside yoga and inside psychology, and like, oh, they just go hand in hand, and that's beautiful. And I appreciate that you could like not separate yourself furthermore than society asks us to, and just really listen and deepens this relationship to yourself. Like, really, that's what I want to do. And I'm just going to go into it and deep into it. And it's going to be just my path, and building it step by step. I think it's pretty encouraging as well for anyone, including me, who just like, if I want to do it, I will do it all at once. Well, maybe no, maybe you just study 4 years and then you have a break and then you go back to it. And it's okay as well not to be so linear and so you know, expecting the next step. It can just unfold by itself as well, and maybe meeting people or job opportunities or anything, or a yoga practice that just sparks something up and, you know, raise something to your awareness, and like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. So it's beautiful that you could also follow your own growth process. So I appreciate that. Yeah.
Pleasure.
And I'm curious that actually you talked about the mental health program that you're leading. And so it's really combining yoga and mental health awareness, right? Yeah. So it's
Yeah.
both
So
for clinical psychologists and yoga teachers? Or
well, I
you?
have two different programs that I run, and one is called Yoga Skills for Health Professionals. So this is a like a short 6-week course. It's online for mental health professionals, so people who are already trained as psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, counselors, this kind of thing, who have their own yoga practice but aren't trained as yoga teachers, who want to start to bring some of the yoga to deepen their own yoga practice, and start to bring some of the yoga practices into their clinical work. And it might be they just want to bring a little bit in, or it might be the beginning of a teacher training program, just like a taster. So that's one program, and the other program is called Mental Health Aware Yoga, and this is the one that maybe you heard of. And this is a program to teach yoga teachers about mental health, because I really think that yoga is amazing for mental health, but it also has the capacity to not be so amazing as well. And so we need to be really, teaching in a way that's trauma informed and supportive and nourishing for our students. And, I would love to see all yoga teachers to have this knowledge. And so when people go to any style of yoga class, because there's so many different styles of yoga and they're all great. Like, I think we need different styles at different times to suit our temperament and to suit our needs at that time. And my goal, my vision for the future is that all yoga teachers have this knowledge about mental health. So when yoga students go to a yoga class, they're really held, no matter what style of yoga they go to, they're really supported and held in that class, because we know that so many people are coming to yoga for mental health reasons. There was a study in Australia, it was about 25 years ago now, and a guy called Stephen Penman wrote his PhD thesis on the state of yoga in Australia, and he interviewed thousands of people. It was a huge sample size, and he found that nearly 80% of people reported practicing yoga for mental health benefits. I wouldn't be surprised if that's even more now. And whenever I have this discussion, because I teach, I have the mental health aware yoga training, but I also teach on other yoga teacher training courses, and I share these statistics, and most people in the course say, yeah, that's why I practice yoga. Either that's why I started yoga, or that's why I keep practicing yoga. It helps with my mental health. It might not be the only reason, right? But it's one of the reasons that people are coming. And so I just think it's so important that yoga teachers, one, understand mental health, and two, know how to really support their students so they can help rather than cause harm in the yoga space.
Well, it's a beautiful vision, and I totally agree. And yeah, I think it's pretty necessary, especially yoga becoming more and more popular and transformed as well, which isn't bad or wrong or good. I don't know, but it is the way it is. So now that many people are training, and sometimes, trainings are like 20 hours online, and yeah, okay, that can be enough if you're a practitioner, but then where is the cautious and care and awareness and understanding of really, like, you have people in front of you, and the role is to take care of them. So it's pretty important to be skilled enough, or at least aware enough to know that, yeah, I lack skills now, and maybe these programs can be adapted to me. So that's beautiful to question that, because really it's like holding space. And I know safe space is also something that is overused as well. Like, I want everyone to be safe here, and I hear that sometimes, and then I enter the space and I'm like, oof, I'm not feeling safe at all. So it's like, what can we do for that? Or maybe, touch consent, or so many times I kind of feel fear, even though I am teaching myself. Like, I can feel fear to go to a yoga class, or like spend maybe 20 minutes like looking at their bio, and like, I'm not sure it will be good for me. Like, and it talks again about my story, but I'm kind of sure that many people share that. So yeah, I think it's meaningful and important that, everyone at least knows about, touch and trauma and co-regulation as well, or up and down regulation. It's like principles that really need to be widely understood. So yeah, I'm glad that you can be on that mission. Yeah.
And actually, as you're saying that, I'm thinking, how great would it be if we all had that? Like, these are just human skills, really. But particularly when we're stepping into the role of a yoga teacher, knowing that people are coming to yoga for mental health reasons, that it's really important that we have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just the knowledge of it. Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And the willingness to improve our skills, because we aren't all clinicians or, or therapists, and that's okay. Like, we can have different paths, and yet the knowledge is accessible, and it's kind of the duty of a yoga teacher as well, I guess, I believe. So maybe I'm like very serious about that, but that's really something that is close to me. And I guess also because I've lived it as a student as well, like just freezing and not feeling able to say to the teacher, like, hey, that's not okay for me. And even though I know it, and I'm just like, wow, that's crazy how the power over dynamic can still trigger us even when we have the skills and the knowledge. So yeah, I'm just sometimes afraid that many people who have even less knowledge and awareness of that can just be so triggered and then dysregulated at a yoga class, which is the opposite normally. So yeah.
Ideally. Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that you brought up around a safe space, because we can't actually create a safe space for everyone. Like, that's not possible. We can do the best that we can to create to create a space or a container that is most likely to be safe, or least likely to cause harm, but we never actually know.
Yeah, I appreciate the humbleness that it requires. Just to know that. We're so different, and our path and wounds and needs are very, very different and unique. So and I guess, I'm sure that's what you teach as well on your programs, but really this kind of invitational language and offering choices, and just allowing us as teachers to give agency to the students. So because we don't know what they need, then at least they can themselves learn a little bit about what they need. So that's pretty precious.
And we can be humble and accepting and open as well. So if we do mess up, or we do say something that's triggering or not okay, that hopefully they can come and tell us about it, and we can learn and do better.
Yeah, I love that it loops back to me to the collective intelligence and growth as well, like yoga teachers and practitioners, and all in the same room, literally, but also on the same journey. And like, just the humbleness that we messed up. Well, let's try to grow that together and not falling back into the shame process, or like the really dissociation or separation again. So that's pretty beautiful. I love that vision.
Let's make it happen. Yay.
And I'm glad that you can make it happen. That's pretty beautiful. That's important, I guess, and I know that it's online as well, so that's nice too, because not everybody can travel to Australia neither. So that's wonderful that you can bring that to the table to everyone worldwide. So that's nice. And it's ongoing, or it's like specific dates for this mental health program?
Yeah, we have specific dates. So we just had a whole bunch of students joining us from around the world last month, and so so the next online training, we haven't set the dates yet, but it'll be at the end of either towards the end of the year or early next year. But if people are interested in finding out about it, you can go to our website.
For sure.
Social media, and if you jump on our email list, we'll let you know when the next.
For sure. I will link all of that on the bio for sure. And I was just curious about maybe one thing that I'm not sure how to turn that. Well, you're a clinical psychologist, and so it's all about learning. That's what I understood. It's all about learning about pathologies and symptoms and how to really go through them, right?
Often,
okay, so it can be, so maybe you'll expand me onto that, and I'm glad you can. And so I have this vision of really, and maybe that's very French, but like compartmentalizing people into a box, like this is what you have, or this is what you are even. And I'm just a little bit not comfortable with that idea, and so I'm curious about what you think about depathologizing, and what's your thoughts are on that, and if this is something that you question yourself about, or I don't know.
It's actually been a journey for me. I think you're talking about diagnostic criteria, right?
Yeah,
so
for example.
people. So clinical psychology is about diagnosing and treating mental illness. I guess that at its essence, that's what it's about. That's not really what I do. But that's, if you think about what clinical psychology is, part of being a clinical psychologist in Australia, as opposed to another type of psychologist, a generalist psychologist or a counselling psychologist, is political. Our Medicare system in Australia gives gives clients a bigger rebate. So in Australia, people pay for their mostly people pay for their psychology sessions, and then they get a rebate from the government that covers a good portion of that.
Okay.
If they see a clinical psychologist, they get more money back. If they see any other type of psychologist, doesn't matter if you've had the same master's or doctorate or PhD level of training, if it's not a clinical psychologist, they get less. Your clients get less money. So part of being a clinical psychologist in Australia is political in the way that the Medicare rebates work. But technically, clinical psychologist is often about diagnosis and treatment of that. So I was trained in diagnosis and, identifying mental illness and then supporting treatment. And then after I graduated, I really moved away from that and didn't do a lot. I worked a little bit in diagnosis and then moved away from that and didn't like putting people in boxes and didn't find it particularly helpful. A lot of the people who were coming to see me weren't finding it particularly helpful. And so I moved away from that model. But I'm actually coming back again towards it now, as I'm really starting to see how these diagnostic criteria and labels can actually be really helpful for many people. And especially, I don't know if you've noticed in Australia anyway, if it's happening in France as well, there's a lot of people being diagnosed with things like ADHD and autism spectrum disorder and PTSD and complex trauma. And what I'm hearing for people is now that the stigma around mental illness has been significantly reduced, or at least that's my experience talking to people about this, that people are actually starting to embrace these labels when it's not such a bad stigmatized thing to be diagnosed with ADHD or autism spectrum disorder or complex trauma, that we can actually reclaim them and say, and it can help us to make sense of our experience. So it's not that you need to identify as somebody with trauma or whatever, although some people do like to identify it in that way, particularly with autism spectrum disorder. There's a movement around saying I am autistic rather than I have autism, and different people choose different ways of relating to it. But it's often less about identifying with it and more about this explains it. This helps me to make sense of my experience, and now I have a name for it. Now I know what to do about it. And sometimes it's yoga, sometimes it's psychotherapy, sometimes it's medication, sometimes it's taking a sabbatical for a year. I mean, I don't know, whatever it is, it's the steps that you take are different. But I've been noticing more and more how powerful it can be to have a name and an explanation for why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. It can be empowering rather than putting somebody in a box.
Yeah, just reclaiming and just taking back the power over like the mass image about illness and imbalance, and just like, hey, this is where I'm at now, and this is a strategy that my system just found to navigate and go through all the shit that happens in life, because there's a lot sometimes. So yeah, it's just like where I'm at now, and I can embrace and be with myself, and either, as you said, through any therapy or yoga, which can be therapeutic at times. So really just being with it and holding it for ourselves, and then finding solutions and new strategies to implement. So, but again, it looks back to what we said at the beginning. We need awareness before we can act upon it. So if we are just in an automatic mode, like we just don't see it, it's like Carl Jung, it's like the shadow, like it's behind us, like we just it controls us because we don't see it. So just coming back onto the driver's seat. I love this expression in English, like just come back into the driver's seat of your own life and just like, hey, face the reality as well, which is yoga, like just truthfulness, like be clear that this is where you are and what happens within you and around you as well, with oppression that we touched on, and that's a fact. Okay, and you can do something about it or not do anything about it, but at least you have choice, and you can really choose for yourself, and that's pretty empowering and beautiful. That's a revolution in and of itself. So I appreciate that you can expand my my vision of of clinical psychology, instead of like just reducing people to categories and medications then. So it can be that, but it can be also the other way around.
At its worst, that's what it is. But at its best, it's a tool for understanding, self-inquiry, self-understanding, and healing and growth. And I think, for me, the piece that feels different is the judgment.
Yeah.
that we bring to it. If we see a diagnosis, if we have a diagnosis and we think badly of ourselves, if we're given a diagnosis, or badly of somebody else for a diagnosis, then it becomes problematic, because then there's a separation, and there's a shame and a judgment. Whereas if it's a process of inquiry, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, now that makes sense. And we let go of the judgment and the shame around it and be curious about it.
Yeah. Which is very present in yoga and somatics, usually, like just diving into it, like, oh, okay, let's see what's within, like, how do I breathe now? And maybe we judge that we don't breathe deep enough according to the vision that we have, but okay, just be curious that you're judging yourself. Like, it's okay, like just be with what is. And I appreciate that compassion-based approach to psychology, so that you can really implement psychology with yoga, and that's pretty beautiful. And I guess, I don't know how you lead your therapy sessions, for example, but do you really use these kind of practices, or the practice that you led us at the beginning and to introduce the sessions? Is that how you combine both?
Sometimes, yeah. So, I've been doing this for a long time. And so whenever somebody asks me, what kind of therapy do you do? My answer is always, well, it depends on the client in front of me. And so I have trained in many different modalities. But really, when I meet a client, I get in the first session, we get to know each other. They need to make sure that they think I'm a good fit for them. And then I get to know them and hear about what's going on for them, and make sure that I feel like I have something to offer. And then the question is, well, what would you like to get out of our sessions? And that's the jumping off point. Often it's, I'm anxious and I don't want to feel anxious anymore. And I'm interested in yoga. So can you teach me some yoga to help me with, so really it's just what's going on for them, and what are their goals? What do they want to get out of our time together? And that's the direction we go in, drawing on different modalities. And really, when I find that I talk to experienced practitioners that have been doing this for more than 10 years, you get the similar kind of, like, when you say what kind of therapy they do, they're like, oh, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And when we look at the research of what different types of therapy work, there's like very clear kind of manualized treatment protocols. But the reality is, when you're sitting with someone, you want to meet them where they are, what's going on for them, the approaches that they're interested in, what's going to fit into their life, and work from there.
More in the now, and the importance to have many skills and trainings and curiosity as well, or practices that you can then have on your tools belt, and just like picking on it and using it according to what they need. And I really appreciate that you just ask them, what do you want to do today, or what do you want to have out of it? Because then it's more into like a coaching approach, and really like being with them and co-creating it, instead of just like observing them and like writing down and imagining that they have this trouble or this illness. It's more like humanistic, and I appreciate that co-creation process. Yeah, that's beautiful.
And I mean, that's very different than the way I was trained initially in my program, which was more about like, you're the expert, you listen to the problems, and then you work out a treatment plan. And while definitely that I bring my my training and my knowledge and all that to the table, people wouldn't come and see me if they didn't want that part of it. But really, a lot of the time I feel like my job is helping people to remember what they already know, and to put into practice what they already know.
Wow.
So often it's a question of, what do you think might be helpful here? Okay, let's do that. And we do that, and it works, and great.
No. Yeah, that's so transformative just to think about it. I'm like, that is very possible. And again, because I'm a yoga teacher, but I'm just like putting that into the yoga setting imagination. But again, like, how are you people today? Like, and what do you want to explore today? And how is it that you want to, learn about anxiety? And okay, you feel that, then let's explore anxiety, but also having safe enough practices on the other side, and finding a balance, and playing with them. So that's beautiful.
What we need to be really mindful of in the context of being a yoga teacher, and that's what we're talking about here, is scope of practice. And so while we're talking about my journey as a clinical psychologist, and we're also talking about how so many people come to yoga for mental health benefits, unless we're otherwise trained as a mental health professional, our role as a psychologist is not to do counseling, is not to offer therapy. Our role is like this educational framework of yoga. And I think it's really important that we stay within our scope of practice, both for the safety of our students, for our own kind of psychological, emotional safety, so we know that we're doing a good job, but also to recognize that there is a time and a place for clinical psychology and counseling, and there's also a time and a place for yoga. One is not better than the other. They are different things, and it's important that we're trained in the area and experienced in the areas that we're working. But staying within, if we're trained as a yoga teacher, staying within the scope of practice as a yoga teacher and sharing yoga, staying out of the story, not trying to fix or rescue anyone, being present and sharing breath practices and meditation and movement is such a beautiful, amazing thing. And it can be as an adjunct to therapy, or it can be a thing just on its own, and it's not less than, it's a different modality, and it's beautiful. It's such a powerful thing to be offering.
It's needed as well. Like, I love that it's not less than to you, and I appreciate the scope, and also the awareness that is required as a yoga teacher as well, to train in mental health awareness, which is not 10 years as you did. Like, it's maybe, I don't know how long your program is, but maybe 6 a few months. A month. So, like, you're not going to be like become a therapist in a month, but at least you have some skills, and then you can also open up to collaborations, and I don't know, like maybe joining a medical house, or I don't know if it exists in Australia, but a place where many therapists just share the office and have a team as well, not being the only one feeling that you have to do it all at once, even though you don't have the diplomas or the skills, and just like, hey, I have this person in the yoga settings and they are just struggling with that. Can you maybe do something for them or with them? So that's beautiful as well, to open up, and again, the humbleness that it requires. But I appreciate the just not lowering the power of yoga neither. So it's just staying where it is. So that's beautiful.
Many people who do come and take the mental health aware yoga training, I mean, it's for yoga teachers. You don't have to have any other kind of mental health training, and again, it doesn't train you to become a therapist. Like, that's like at least another 3-year degree. Like, this training happens over a 6-month period. But also many people, more and more people who are already yoga teachers and mental health therapists are coming and doing the training as well, psychologists and social workers and counselors, and because they already have those skills, then they're using the information from the training in a different way than yoga teachers are, and bringing it therapeutically into their work too.
I love seeing that they just come together, and that's yoga, right? To yoke together, to just bring all together at once. So that's pretty inspiring to me. I appreciate that. How often, especially in society that is really into titles also and degrees, and and how separated it can feel. Like, if you have or experience this illness, you have to go there and there. Well, maybe you can do both if you can afford it, or you can do then and after the other. It's just again trusting yourself as well, and I would just love it so much that all the universities will just have on the degrees, like somatics and yoga, and the approach that you build and you weave with your clients in both yoga and therapy. That's enthusiastic to me. That's a big picture again, and I'm a big picture lover, so I see like the vision that it could just change society.
Like, there are more and more trainings that are doing that. I'm not sure, like the traditional psychology ones, maybe not so much, but you can do, like I said, like a master's or a PhD in somatic psychology. A friend of mine's doing a PhD in consciousness or something amazing,
beautiful,
like that, online from America. And there's lots of different trainings. I think you just need to look a little bit more broadly than the narrow confines of Western society.
Totally. I love that, and having curiosity again, and just like trying things out as well. And that's what I heard from you as well, just like trying a degree, and then traveling, trying yoga trainings, and then coming back to studying. So that's beautiful as well, that it's not that closed down, and that you don't have to follow the exact steps that you think you should. So that's pretty eye-opening. I love the your mouth think like, no, you don't have to.
I'm like, that sounds boring.
Yeah, it sounds boring. Really, like, like every single day.
That's just my
what's...
makeup. That's just my makeup as well. For some people, having a really clear path and following it is, it feels great and feels safe, and there's a, and feels clear. But for me personally, that sounds like torture.
Yeah, it's not meeting your own needs. Right? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it doesn't echo the way you want to live. So yeah. So beautiful. And before, just to wrap it up, I'm curious if there is maybe one principle or thematic topic that you are experiencing these days, maybe in yoga, for example. I sometimes, peek on the Patanjali's text or just concepts and try to embody them at times. Or I don't know if you do this kind of thing, or if there is something that inspires you specifically these days. And if there's not, that's okay too. Yeah.
There's like a billion things that I'm thinking about. Actually, a podcast that I was listening to on the way here is called Rest as Resistance. And it's talking about this idea of rest and taking time. And, I think there's this, we're so busy and we're so rushing around all the time. And I feel that in my own life, and I teach people about rest, right? And I still rush around and feel busy and try to get lots of things done. And so this, I mean, you just asked me, and this is what's kind of been percolating in my mind today as I've been listening to, sorry, not a podcast, an audiobook. It's a great audiobook. It's called Rest as Resistance. And it's this idea that, we connect in with our divine spark when we rest. We have more creativity when we rest. We're breaking out of the capitalist kind of white privilege structures that we're all kind of weighed down by when we take time out and we rest and we allow ourselves to be not productive and to just be. And this is often what we're doing in yoga, right? Like we're dropping into being, we're just being, we're connecting with the divine, with our own divine spark. We're stepping out of the hustle and the grind, and we're simply being without any particular agenda or trying to reach any kind of KPIs or goals or bank balances. And this kind of pull between the reality of having to make a living and doing stuff and care for our children, and doing the things that are required in the world, and this like deeper calling that I have, many people that I speak to have. I don't want to overgeneralize and say everyone has, but I would say many of us have, perhaps all of us, I don't know, to be.
Such a beautiful note to end on, just finding the balance between doing and being. Yeah, beautiful invitation. Appreciate that. Appreciate really your time and your vision and your just sensitivity to bringing human back to yoga, because at times it can be forgotten, and psychology. So I appreciate that, and just appreciate your work. And I will make sure to write everything down so everyone can find your programs and your library as well, and your beautiful website, so anyone can discover your work. Yeah, my pleasure.
We have a free ebook on the mental health aware yoga website that's called Patanjali's 8 Limbs of Mental Health Aware Yoga. So bringing in Patanjali's wisdom into talking about Western psychology, and how as yoga teachers we can bring that wisdom from the sutras into our teaching. Beautiful. I love that. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for your time today. And yeah, my pleasure. It's been very enriching. So thank you so much. And I hope you have a restful evening. I will.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And talk very soon.